10 financial institutions being probed by the state in relation to the looting, as it were, of nearly $100 million worth of taxpayer funds from the National Youth Service. What does this mean for Kenyan taxpayers, but also for the financial system as a whole? Let's find out. Ken Gishinga is the Chief Economist of Ventoria Consulting. He's live with me in studio right now. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, for those of us who are not in-depth connoisseurs of banking, when we hear this three-letter acronym, KYC, know your customer,
Right.
What exactly does it mean from a compliance perspective for a bank?
Well, let me first start by saying that the banking sector is the most regulated sector in the economy. Anything in the Banking Act of Kenya means that everything has to be rigorously processed. This includes KYC, know your customer. So this means anything that the deposits that the customer is bringing to the bank, you really have to know what is the source of these deposits. Anything over $10,000 has to be declared. Any movement has to, and the reason they do this is because they want to keep track on things around money laundering, things around crimes of proceeds of crime. So that's the reason that the bank has to really make sure that it has very clear steps in knowing who it's dealing with.
But knowing it is one thing, because if I walk into a bank today, like if I walk into my bank and I say, okay, here's $10,000, they'd be like, okay, where did you get the cash? I can make up whatever story I want, but let's say for argument's sake, right, that maybe it's a proceeds of pirate money.
Right.
What then can a bank do beyond filing a suspicion action report?
No, you're right, and that used to be the case a long time ago. People would simply say that this is business money, or this is money I got from an inheritance, or this is money I got from a different source. But with the new governor coming in, he's been far more hawkish in how we declare, and we have specific documents besides the SAR, which you have mentioned, that if there is suspicion around what exactly, where is this money coming from, we do have 3 other documents that can be filed by the branch manager to make sure that, yes, we are not very certain about this client. I think we need to do some extra vetting of this client.
But realistically, if I come to you as a client and you're my bank, right, and I tell you, okay, yes, there's this 10,000 shillings or $10,000, you have your suspicions about it, but can you stop that transaction? If I tell you move it from account A to account B, can you stop it as a bank?
Absolutely. Banks have the right to refuse to conduct transactions. Banks have the right to refuse deposits which they think it's not very clear, the origins. So that is within their rights. Obviously, banks also have a profit motive. They are in the business to make money. So obviously, it has to be something very grand, something very that really stands out for those extra measures to be triggered.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is, as our Kenyan viewers will know, this is the second time there's been another scandal relating to the exact same agency. The last one had about $16 million worth of cash involved, and another bank was involved in that one, Family Bank. The case is still in progress right now. Now, realistically, going back to your point, yes, banks can refuse to, but they've never really faced any realistic consequences, painful consequences, for handling dirty money, at least not in this country, have they?
Historically, you're right, that's never been the case. But the new thinking, not just in Kenya, not just in Africa, globally, central banks are under a lot more pressure to really make sure that they understand every aspect around their customer. The risk profiles, what we call the IFRS, is really around understanding every risk that a bank faces from its clientele. So yes, it's not perfect, but it's it's much better than where we used to be maybe 5 years ago.
All right. There's something else that also comes up in this story, because a lot of Kenyans will be familiar with one of 2 entities we're talking about here. The central bank, we all know that. Then there's this other body called the FRC, the Financial Reporting Center.
Right.
So for a lot of people, they'll be asking, okay, what do these two do? What's the delineation of responsibility? Once that suspicious action report is filed by a bank, and it goes to both of these bodies, what happens next?
So ultimately, the central bank is the regulator of the banking sector. Everything, the backstops at the central bank. Legally speaking, it's really the mother of all the banks. So any other entities, and the banks have something called the banking supervision departments. So yes, you'll have smaller mandates around the FRC, the banking supervision department, but the gist of the legislation behind these bodies is to make sure that there is a way of, it's a make-a-checker kind of process where if one fraudulent example escapes one route, then it's possible for the banking supervision to capture it. So you create a tangle interfaces that make it very difficult for anyone who wants to beat the system to do it. It's not perfect, but what we are seeing right now is we are getting a lot more sort of like traction around corruption fraud.
Okay, one last question for you, and I should point this out both to you and to our viewers. Right now, there's no evidence per se. Right. It's not been, none of these banks have been convicted for anything, at least not in this particular case. But let's assume for argument's sake, because these are tier 1 banks that are involved here. Let's assume for argument's sake that one of them or two of them are found to have been culpable in some form in moving money from point A to point B. What effect would it have, A, on banking in future in this market, and B, on a broader financial industry? Because at face value, one of the things that does come up to mind is that some of these banks will simply turn around and say, okay, you know what, we're not dealing with government money anymore, we're not dealing with government clients. Yes, their fees will be lucrative, but really don't want the regulatory headache.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Banking is all about trust. So even to be mentioned to be a suspect is already condemnation in public opinion. And that's the reason they're not even mentioning the banks that they're suspecting, because just lack of that trust deficit, if it's eroded from a bank, then it really can even lead to a runoff, a bank run, where everybody comes and believes that bank will be collapsing soon. So it's a very sensitive sector, but obviously it's a critical sector to the economy. But to your question, what does it mean for business moving forward? I mean, money still has to move across the economy, and the banking sector is the best avenue in how money moves around the bank. So that wouldn't change. Government has to pay employees, government has to pay suppliers, so you'll always need that banking sector.
But at the end of the day, if you're James Mwangi, right, for example, Equity Bank CEO, or Gideon Miroki over at Corp Bank, or Lamin Majang at Stanchart, at some point you've got to sit back and ask yourself, is it really worth it? Is it worth the risk that this money might be tainted versus the fees that might come in, the fees and the interest income that might come in from government dealers?
Well, it's a question of probability. How often are these fraudulent cases being flagged? I mean, it's really, I mean, we had the NYS last time. This is like the second major issue. So it's nowhere compared to the regular, ordinary good money that is coming in every day. And that's the source of your cheap deposits, which you'll in turn make into loans and make a profit. So if you remove government deposits, then where are you going to get sources to make your loans from? You're going to collect it from private citizens, but that's not enough deposit for you to be profitable. And these banks have targets which they have to hit for their board. So yeah, it's a complex system. It's not a perfect system, but I'm very confident with what the governor is doing in terms of, even if it's not prosecuting people, it's creating a culture of fear
and consequences,
which might deter future incidences.
All right, let's see how this plays out. King Gishinga, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.